Okay, everybody good?
Hi, my name is Scott Haney, and I'm here to talk to you today and persuade you concerning the topic of the problem of evil. Now let me define the problem of evil by paraphrasing the philosopher Epicurus, who basically said it this way: how can an all-powerful, all-loving God allow evil to exist? So that is basically the premise of my argument. And so I am going to be arguing against Epicurus in his philosophical question and give you a reason for, and possibly a little more dynamic to the philosophical realm and what he's actually getting at and what he kind of missed. So first, I want to define what is evil. Webster defines evil as something that is inherently bad, some sort of moral character and imperfection. It basically attributes it down to an entity, a person, who is making poor moral choices or has some sort of a deficient character. That is the definition of what evil is. Now, we tend to lump evil into a whole lot of areas and a whole lot of different situations, and as I go through this speech, I will hopefully tackle some of those issues and clear a lot of those things away. There are a couple of types of evil. First, we can sum it up into individual evil. Individual evil would be things such as murder or rape, robbery, some sort of evil where an individual person does something against another individual. There's also evil from the state. We would list these things as Hitler or Stalin or some sort of country that is doing some sort of genocide, such as the Serbian genocide back in the 90s. We would also think of Nero and all of the great horrible crimes that he committed, and all of the other tyrants who did things throughout all the centuries, and the countries and the people that supported them and allowed them to do those things. That would be evil from the state. Now, there are actually two sides to the argument. There's the negative side of the argument, which I'm attributing to Epicurus, which is, as I stated earlier, how can God, who is all-powerful and all-loving, allow evil and still be considered God? Then there's the positive side of the argument, which comes from the theist. Whether you be Christian or Muslim, you all subscribe to a theist perspective on it. So with that idea, the traditional view of the theist is that God created mankind with free will. Free will enabled mankind to commit evil. Because mankind commits evil, he is the one who actually has brought evil into the world. Now, from there, I want to actually begin to break this down a little bit. Epicurus touches on something that's interesting. He touches on God's omnipotence, his all-powerfulness. Now, whenever we talk about God being all-powerful, that God can do whatever he wants, he can do anything at all, are we actually saying that God could create a rock that even God could not pick up? Or are we saying that God could create a being so powerful that he's even more powerful than God? No, we're not talking about those things, because those would be logical inconsistencies. They would just be absurdities at that point. Whenever we talk about God being all-powerful, what we're talking about is God is able to do all things that are logically possible. God can't be something that is logical and illogical all in the same sense. It's absurd. So that I hope that kind of breaks down some of the omnipotence piece. Other parts of what we actually want to talk about is, could God create a world where free will exists, but mankind can't commit evil? That's one of the questions that the philosopher Alvin Pantenja actually asked. How could God create a world with free will in it, but exclude mankind with the ability to do evil? At that point in time, he has now deprived mankind of complete free will. C.S. Lewis, the famed author of the 20th century, said it this way: find a world where evil can't exist, and you will find that you have deprived mankind of life itself. So with that, we find ourselves in a precarious situation where it would be impossible for us to be denied the ability to commit evil in this world under the construct and still have free will. So now I want to actually get back to Epicurus for my second part. Epicurus actually is, he's begging the question, to be honest with you. He's leaving a whole lot that is left to be desired. The first thing that he's actually done with his argument is he's managed to absolve man of all responsibility. He said, if God's all-powerful and he can do all things, then it's not my fault that I commit evil. The things that I do that are wrong aren't my fault, they're his fault. Because he didn't strip me of that ability. He has also managed to create a logical fallacy. He's managed to sit there and throw something upon God without allowing a full logical conclusion to it. Now, we have to sit there and say, what else is the problem with this argument? And the argument actually really gets kind of interesting whenever you think about philosophy. And that is, especially if you look at it in light of logic. How does Epicurus judge God's goodness by him not stopping evil? He does it by using a universal moral law. Where did the universal moral law come from? The universal moral law would have to come from a universal moral law given. So by de facto, he is already positing that God exists. He has now painted himself into a corner. And with that, he has actually thrown upon it that he's going to judge God by the moral law that God gives. How absurd is that? God, I'm going to judge you by the law that you provide and say that you don't exist. He has already undermined his own philosophy, and he has stripped himself of any ability to come logically to the conclusion. So, for the most part, that is the argument in a nutshell. But what it also doesn't address, and I'm going to wrap up with this point and then do a Q&A with you, is that it does not address if God is supposed to expunge all evil, how is it that he allows me and all of my imperfections and evil to still exist? He would have to wipe me out as well. Epicurus was not going for that. He was looking to absolve man from any wrongdoing. And that's where his argument falls flat. So, does anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am, and then I'll take yours.
Sorry. What made you pick this topic?
It's actually a topic that I'm very passionate about. I spent the majority of my 20s wrestling with this topic, and I find it fascinating. I've not always been a huge philosophy fan. I've grown to love it, and with that has kind of come this intrigue with the topic. I do have a very strong religious background, and it does drive a lot of the decisions that I've made, but I was a very confused teenager and early 20 adult, and so with that I grappled and wrestled with these things and finally came to a conclusion that I believe has provided me with some peace. So, hope that answers your question. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a large following of people who believe in the Epicurus philosophy?
They tend to traditionally be either atheists or skeptics. The Epicurus philosophy, you would actually sum it up as an Epicurean, and it really was kind of live life as you can today, do whatever you want to. So in some rudimentary level, a lot of people still do, even though they don't fully subscribe to it. They may subscribe to Carpe Diem, seize the day, that type of philosophy, but they'll throw it in that they do believe there is a higher power. So you kind of find this hybrid, especially in our culture and day and time, where people have mixed and meshed things together. So, are there any other questions? Well, very good. Thank you. I hope that helped everybody. Great.
Good job.
Very good.